Welcome to the Neurodiverse Lens, a CDL podcast featuring Carolyn and Jordan.
Welcome to the Neurodiverse Lens, a Center for Diverse Learners podcast. In this podcast, we talk about topics related to neurodiversity in a bunch of different ways. Today, we're going to be focusing on the workplace. I am Carolyn Rankin-Booten. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Diverse Learners, and I'm joined here by Jordan, who is our social engagement and communications manager. I never get her title right. That's okay. And we really wanted to do this podcast because we wanted to talk about issues that affect the neurodiverse community. There's a lot of information out there, and we just wanted to share our perspective in a way that really validated different people's perspective. I'm a neurodiverse person myself, and so I wanted to share my perspective on different topics. As I mentioned, today we're talking about workplace, and we're talking about how neurodiversity shows up in the workplace and what workplaces are like for neurodiverse individuals. Because being honest, before we start talking about some of the successes and ways it can be successful, we know that neurodiverse individuals are underemployed. We know, based on research, that statistically, only 1 in 10 autistic people with the capacity to work is working full-time. So that is a huge loss to our entire community. So this is definitely something we need to be talking about from both perspectives, both from the worker and the workplace. And as someone who is both a worker and a manager, I thought we would dive into it today.
Yeah, some of the things that I kind of want to discuss today include, some challenges neurodiverse folks might face in the workplace. How we can design a more inclusive environment, a more working environment, from the perspective of the employees versus the employer or the manager of the workplace. I also kind of want to talk about how to foster that environment to really build up neurodiverse individuals. I think between the two of us, this is a really good conversation because, just based on where we work at CDL, our office is super inclusive, and I'm really excited to talk about the strategies that we in our day-to-day work life. So I'm kind of gonna focus on more of, it might be a negative, but what workplace challenges might impact neurodiverse individuals first.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And obviously, as I was mentioning, it's something that's really impacting neurodiverse individuals. And we know that neurodiverse individuals want to work, so why is it so challenging? The first thing is, as a society, sometimes we're so focused on the individual and not the space that's where we really come into problems. We're always focused on the deficits that neurodiverse individuals have, and that always sets us off in a negative way. But some of the challenges are real. Neurodiverse people may require some environmental accommodations, meaning a quiet space to work. They may need noise-canceling headphones. They may need a spot to take a break. They may need to be free from distractions. And I say this, and I know you're smiling, because today we were all in the office together, and when we are all in the office together, I can be very distracting to my staff because for me, if I'm going to get real work done, I need to be quiet. I need to be alone. And once a week, we have a collaboration day where we all work together to problem solve. And I can kind of distract the staff because I need a quiet space. And when you think about the simplicity of environmental accommodations and how other people aren't getting it, one of the things that makes it really tough is that sometimes doctors aren't aware that they need to put that on documentation, so it can be hard for neurodiverse individuals to access. There are other things that neurodiverse individuals have. For myself, as you know, I need someone to proofread everything that goes out of mine. I use software to help myself, and then I also have someone to proofread, because for me, when I'm reading my own work, my brain is correcting my own mistakes, and so I don't see them. If you have a boss who's like, why did you send me something that's incorrect, or doesn't give you the opportunity to send it to a coworker, which is my favorite, semi-accommodation. And I know we're going to talk a lot about the difference between having these formal accommodation processes and creating a space, but that can be one. It's just something as simply as having an editor. Time management can be really difficult for neurodiverse individuals. And this can be, I find, sometimes the biggest barrier, because if the employer doesn't understand that their staff person might need support in doing work, it can look like laziness. It can look like not caring. It can look like this person isn't taking the job seriously, but they might need more support with time management.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like even some of those impact myself, especially the quiet space. I love our in-office days because it's nice to spend, the whole day with the team. But I am also excited, kind of looking forward into, building up our space where we are and having the different options of like a collaboration room, a quiet room to take a meeting. I'm also a noise canceling headphone fiend. I always have them on me, and it could be very well just going to the grocery store, or just sitting in my backyard and having them on and getting my work done or getting my errands done, and they make a huge difference, even for someone who might not even be diagnosed or anything like that. So
Which
yeah.
is a big belief of our organization. And if there's one thing I want to get through to everyone, is this: that if you're worried on only giving your employees what they need if they have a formal piece of paper, you're not getting the best out of your workers. You want to give quote unquote accommodations to help your staff do their best work. Mm-hmm. If you want to have an efficient workplace, doing things that in the short term seem inefficient, like giving your worker an extra break to calm down when they need to process information, or taking the extra 15 minutes, some staff need a daily check-in, just 15 minutes of like, this is what's going on today, this is what I need you to focus on. That if you're only providing that to people who have the proper documentation, first of all, you're missing a huge piece of the neurodiverse population. We know still to this day, most neurodiverse people still might not know that they're neurodiverse. We talk about this overdiagnosis, and I think as a community, we know there's still a lot of adults who don't know. 80% of women who will one day be diagnosed as autistic won't know by their 18th birthday. And so at our workplace, our focus is on what people need versus this formal process, and it creates just a better working environment. But you can see, like, we're talking about this, and we're talking about the challenges neurodiverse people have in the workplace. And some of them are real. Some of them are individuals might need software to read things out. But what I'm hoping that people are hearing as I'm talking about these challenges is none of these are insurmountable. Like, all of them can be overcome. It's just a matter of wanting to. And if a workplace wants to hold on to that people only get what they can prove on paper, then they're going to be missing out, and they're going to have employees who aren't able to do their best, and it's going to be frustrating for both the employee and the manager.
Kind of on the topic of the employee and the manager, do you have an example of when potentially an accommodation might have, been effective for an employee of yours or for yourself?
Yeah, I think, firstly, I believe that accommodations often are very successful. But one of the things that I find most successful is the twice a week check-in, having that quick check-in and the longer check-in to help with time management. And this is something that works for my staff, whether they're neurodiverse or not. This accommodation really helps because it allows conversation about priorities. one of the things that I think can make workplaces really hard for neurodiverse people is the communication aspect, that human aspect, the spoken and unspoken, because workplaces are full of unspoken rules, things you are just supposed to know that you might not know.
Yeah.
And by doing those check-ins, you're really able to get a sense, are you on the same page with your employee? Now, this can be absolutely a formal accommodation, especially if you have a worker who has ASD or ADHD. They may actually require these check-ins. But this accommodation is my favorite for everyone because it allows for those conversations, and it reduces the impact of miscommunication. And it also means that your worker never gets so far behind that it starts to impact their mental health. Because what we haven't talked about today is that neurodiversity and mental health often intersect. Mm-hmm. And the workplace can be a place of a lot of stress for your workers. So that's why these accommodations for everyone work a lot better.
Yeah, I know I definitely benefit from the kind of the two-step check-in. I feel like a lot of, the communication skills that I lack are the Teams messages, and the very informal virtual kind of communication. I like emails and that's fine, but the Teams chats and all that stuff, I feel like I struggle with. So I like the video check-ins or the in-person check-ins because I just feel like I can, see the other person's expression, they can see mine, and you can really pick up on those other social cues that can kind of solidify what you're trying to, be on the same page with.
And then it works better when it's also in writing. We use software to put in what we've discussed in the meeting in software, mm-hmm. but it could be as simple as just in the email saying, hey, this is what I remember our conversation being. What do you remember? So that the person has it in writing, or if there's a miscommunication. As you know, I'm a big fan of at the end of a meeting going, okay, what are our action items? Because as you know, having been in many meetings with me, I never know what my action items are. So having that recheck in really allows for us to leave the meeting knowing we're on the same page. Because I think one of the frustrations for a lot of managers can be like, I told them.
Yeah.
I told them to do this thing. They nodded, they agreed, they left my office. We're on the same page, and then it doesn't get done. And it creates this conflict because the worker really meant to get it done but didn't understand what the manager wanted. And the manager is like, but we talked about this.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's one of those accommodations that managers should just do for everybody. And if you're neurodiverse and you didn't know to ask for this, it's an easy thing to ask your manager for. Just, hey, can I meet with you 15 minutes on a Monday to go over what I'm planning on doing this week? Mm-hmm. And can we check in Thursday before the end of day to do that? Which leads me to, this actually should be my favorite accommodation, which is Quiet Fridays.
Yes.
No internal meetings on Fridays, only external meetings if, we have to, like that's when the person can meet.
Yep.
And allowing that day to not be inundated with phone calls and meetings and, oh, by the ways. So when we check in on Thursday, we know that everybody's set up on Friday to actually get work done and be effective. And it's a great way to lead into the weekend. I also find that it leads to better productivity on Fridays versus people just not being focused. I feel like we all look forward to a day to get stuff done. And when I'm not going to be calling you being like, oh, by the way, can you just do this thing? Because it's our quiet day.
Yeah, the Quiet Friday definitely helps me kind of close out my week. It's if you think of it kind of as a retail shift, it's all your closing activities, all your closing jobs you're doing that day. So you're making sure you didn't miss any emails, you're making sure your tasks are all submitted. And it's just kind of nice to be in your own space and not have to worry about, getting ready for a call or anything like that. And obviously there's stuff that comes up or if you do have to meet with someone externally, but sometimes that makes it a bit more fun and you can kind of focus on that without having to worry about rushing back to, make sure you're answering the phones right away or anything like that. So That definitely helps kind of close out my week. But I was wondering, is what role kind of does the language in the workplace have on the stigma of, accommodation and barriers for neurodiverse folks in the workplace?
Yeah, this is the top question I get from everyone about language. And I think the most important thing that an employer can do is two things. Be very transparent on the accommodation process so that that's clear, so that people who are legally entitled to accommodations receive them and they know how to do that. The other thing is allowing people to use the language that best suits them. If you've noticed on my LinkedIn, when I refer to autism, I always do this. I say autistic person, brackets, person with autism, because in our community, there isn't a straightforward decision on whether people like people first language or not. Right. So it's always listening to the individual. The other thing that I think is the big one is how managers talk about accommodations. Do they talk about it like it's a hassle? Or do they talk about this as like something they're excited about because it's going to help their workers be more efficient? And if a manager is rolling their eyes at an accommodation, if they are making someone feel like stood out because of an accommodation, no one's going to ask for accommodations. That's not what's going to happen. People are going to stay silent, and they're going to know that they're going to be judged. The big piece is in talking about accommodations and talking about wanting to be giving them. Like, if a boss is excited about a new accommodation, I mean, as you know, at our work, it's when someone asks for an accommodation, that suddenly becomes available to everyone. Right. And we try to talk about it with excitement, like, ooh, we have now found that this thing was a barrier for one of our employees, not saying what employee it is. Right. And then say this is now available for everyone. There are accommodations, and we use the word accommodations in an informal way here because at our work, obviously there's still a formal accommodation process, but informally we provide them to anyone. There are things that impact the way you do your work, and you have no idea where they came from or what employee spawned that conversation. Right. It becomes this thing, and when you talk about them with excitement, well, people are more likely to look inside themselves. Well, what do I need to do my job? And are more likely to come to me and say, hey, can I have this piece? I will say our formal accommodation process is not as busy as our informal accommodation process. Right. Where staff will come to me and be like, I think this thing would really help me. Are you cool with this? And, 90% of the time, it's an absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, those conversations are definitely, very casual. And I think because of the team that we have, we honestly kind of even bounce ideas off each other even before bringing it to you, right? And then if we can already see that it's working for another, co-manager or team member, then we're going to want to bring it forward and be like, how can everyone kind of benefit from this? And I guess that kind of goes into my next question or point of fostering that inclusive environment. And I know we do a great job at that. I think that's also, we have a benefit of, where we work. But what might another workplace do to kind of foster that culture for people to feel safe about bringing up an accommodation or a barrier?
Yeah, I think obviously, and the research tells us, most people in leadership will not be open about having a disability or may not have a disability. We know that. We know that there are so many barriers in our current society for people with disabilities to rise up, that management may not have disabilities. But the most important thing is everybody has flaws. Everybody has things that they are not as good as other things. And I think as a leader, if you're talking about those things and you're talking about your own process to work through it, then that creates an environment where other people feel comfortable talking about what they need. The other piece is learning about universal design. The idea of universal design is what works for one person should work for everybody. The best way I can describe it is, if you had a workplace and you built stairs, you have now created a barrier for some people. Some people cannot use stairs. However, if you build a ramp, everyone can use the ramp. And so you want to be transparent about your workplace and what are some barriers that you're creating that you could just take away. Childcare is a big issue for lots of families. And so if you're finding that one family is having issues and that worker might need some flexibility, does your workplace benefit from everyone getting that? And though you might say, well, Carolyn, that has nothing to do with disability, but that's how you foster a workplace that is inclusive to disabilities. You're not so focused on this formal conversation about disability. You're focused on needs and meeting the needs. And that's really how you move ahead. Now, there'll always be a need for a formal accommodation process. Sometimes people may have something that's very specific to them that the whole workplace doesn't need. You know, heaven forbid someone was going through chemo, they might need very specific accommodations that really you don't need to open up to the whole workplace. But when you create a workplace that's really designed on trying to meet the needs of the people inside it, that's how you get it. I recently did a training and we were talking about serving clients and how you've got to do accommodations. And there was a lot of managers in the room, and I said, if you want to create an environment where your clients feel comfortable asking for support and asking for help, my question to you is, do you provide the same accommodations you do your clientele that you do to your staff? And if the answer is no, then people know that your stance isn't for real, that you really don't believe in accommodations. It has to be that piece. The other issue is transparency, so that people understand the process to receive the formal accommodations. And, you know, when I do trainings, I often ask, how does someone formally request an accommodation at your workplace? Do you know? And honestly, almost no one ever raises their hand. Well, if the bosses don't know, how are the staff going to know? And then can you imagine how intimidating it is to be neurodiverse, sometimes really not understanding the implicit rules of your organization, and then you have to formally ask for an accommodation? You're more likely to leave. And so if you want to create a great environment, that needs to be transparent and it needs to be celebrated. It seems to me that sometimes workplaces are afraid of accommodations. I often will get questions about fairness, and that's why universal design is so important, because it's like, well, why can't everyone have this? Now, there's some things that you can't do for everyone. Like, for example, our educators are going to have to be available after school. We offer after school programming. That's something I can't be flexible on. But as you know, we have some tutors who are traveling from one location to ours and asked, hey, can we start 15 minutes later? Well, sure, right? We're meeting that need. And I think that's the key. If you want to create a truly inclusive environment, you've got to ask yourself, are we committed to meeting the needs of our employees, or are we just following the formal accommodation process because the AODA tells us we have to? Because your employees will know the difference. They will know if this is something you're excited about and something you're truly committed to, or this is something you are forced to do through gritted teeth and you don't truly believe in. And if you don't truly believe in it, I hope that everyone listening, you know, is a believer, but maybe they're not. If you really don't believe in doing these accommodations, the question you've got to ask yourself is why? You know, and if I'm going to be honest, this is something that has evolved within me. I have never asked for an accommodation at any workplace, schools. I was always entitled to them. I never asked for them. I always had this idea that if I wanted to do it like everybody else. And like, I look back now and I'm like, wow, it could have been so much different if I asked for an accommodations. I had to attack my own ableism, my own thoughts of there is the right way to do something and everything else is the wrong way.
Yeah, I never, you know, really thought of it from that perspective, kind of, you know, especially if the employer doesn't even know how to submit an accommodation. what kind of message is that showing to all of the employees? I think my own growth at CDL over the last 3 years has been, just opening my eyes up to how I really think, like, there's time to learn for everything, but how all of my previous workplaces have been versus now, which is like astronomically different. And it's just so much more inclusive, and that's kind of like, that's the gist of what we're talking about today, is like inclusivity in the workplace and neurodiversity and whatnot. And it's just like such a large jump from where I was previously to being at CDL now.
Well, it was like when I started and everybody started at 8 a.m. And it was like, we offer after school programming. Why are we all starting at 8 a.m.? And there's nothing wrong with that. But the productivity that increased when I started to say to people, like, certain roles have certain time restrictions. But other than that, like,
Right.
you don't need to be available because 8 o'clock is the best time for me to work. Like, that's not going to be for everybody. And it's one of those things that we often position is for the employee. Like, you want to do these things for your employees. But the message I'm trying to get across is, no, as an employer, you want to do these things. You get efficient workers. There are some people who are not efficient at 8 a.m. For me, that is my best time. I get the best work done between 8 and 10 a.m. But I know, that's not the best time for you.
Yeah.
So why would I have you work at that time? I'd rather you work when you're going to work best.
Yeah.
And, but as you know, I'm struggling with the other half on myself of, like, not pushing myself to work when it's not the best time for me to work. I was just talking today about how I'm, like, committed to taking that hour break in the middle of the day so I can be more effective in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I
think the time change of the shifts that I'm kind of online for have made a huge difference, because I used to do a lot of split shifts where it was, I'm online from like 8 till 12, and then I leave and then come back online and do like a 4 to 8, and I just wasn't feeling like I was getting enough accomplished. Or I'd be around 12, okay, let me just stay online and do a couple more tasks. And then next thing you know, I'm working from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. And then the next day, I'm so burnt out. I can't get anything done. I'm distracted. And I think, yeah, definitely just having that conversation with my other team members and you, that, that wasn't working for me. So,
Well, that's actually a perfect example of, it's not, like, I'm making it sound, and it is. If you are committed to meeting people's needs, that it is a wonderful process. But there is often a learning curve each time a new piece comes in, because I let in the flexible things, and so many of you wanted to work the split shift, and it wasn't working.
right.
Because it was exactly what you were saying. People still kind of felt like they were working from noon to 4. Mm-hmm. They weren't enjoying life, and people were burning out. So we had to have a conversation, both individually and as teams, like, I don't think split shifts work.
Yeah.
And like, some days they're necessary because you've got something you've got to go to in the morning and you don't. But that's the whole piece of it, is you don't allow one negative experience of, like, okay, I let my employees completely choose what hours they were working and it didn't work for anybody because split shifts are awful.
Yeah.
And ideally it sounds great. Oh, I'll go and I'll have all afternoon to myself, but you don't, because someone will forget that you're on split shift and send a Teams message and that piece. And it's being committed to that process of always looking into it, but it's still tough. And I want to say, and this is such an important message, that even with accommodations, neurodiverse workers might still have trouble in the workplace. It's not going to instantly make work easy. It isn't about completely eliminating all challenge. It's about trying to meet the needs of the worker so that they can be their best selves. It's not to eliminate any difficulty. And I think that's what can sometimes hang a manager up. It's like, well, I've given them the accommodations. We went through the process. Why is there still difficulty? Well, being a neurodiverse person in a neurotypical world is very difficult. And so it's about being committed to the process so that when the difficulty comes, you don't just abandon it full stop. You know, we didn't go, no more flexible hours. We went, okay, let's talk about flexible hours. Let's make sure that everyone's getting what they need and that kind of piece. But it's still going to be difficult. I mean, we have this podcast because it's difficult to be a neurodiverse person. If it was easy, we could just put on our website, have flexible hours and an easy accommodation process, and it would be completely fixed. This is why I do trainings at workplaces, because I can't just send them to our website and be like, everything's fixed. Each workplace is different. Our workplace has the unique piece of, in the evenings, we have sometimes 25 different tutors out in the world educating our students. And there's going to be certain processes with that. It's not something that just happens. And I really want to validate the experience of neurodiverse people and how difficult work can be. And that there are going to still be some neurodiverse people, even with all accommodations, where work might be difficult. They may need to work part-time. And I really want to make sure that everything I'm saying doesn't take away from that or act like there is a way of doing it where things will be perfect. It will still be challenging. What we really need is managers who are committed to stepping up to the plate and making their workplaces positive for neurodiverse individuals, because from my perspective, neurodiverse individuals make the workplaces better. Not just from a diversity angle, but there's a lot of strengths with neurodiverse staff.
Yeah, and I would say, our team is very open about their neurodiversities, and I honestly would say, like, our team works together so well, and it's that different lived experience that everyone brings to the team, that when we do have kind of a larger issue at hand, or there's a situation with a family that we're dealing with, kind of everyone's able to bring that different perspective and feel validated and feel heard and be able to help out our other team members who are then dealing with that situation with that family. And I think that's really important.
And you need that mix. For example, someone like me, I'm a great problem solver and a big idea thinker. Sometimes details are not my thing. So we have people on our team to kind of balance that who are very details person. And so it's interesting when you can have two neurodiverse individuals, even with similar diagnoses, but it looks different, and that creates a better workplace. And when you have conversations openly about strengths and needs, that's where they can get met. I'm very transparent about the things I'm good at and the things I'm bad at, to the point that sometimes it makes you guys upset because I'll be like, I'm terrible at that. And you'll be like, no, don't say that. But no one's going to be great at everything. And what I do know is that neurodiverse people often bring different skill sets that neurotypical people don't often have. Across the board, almost every neurodiverse diagnosis, though not all, unique problem solving is what they bring. So if you have a workplace that has problems, which is every workplace, it's great to have neurodiverse people on your team who are going to look at the problem from a different angle and be able to provide a different perspective. And that's why it's important to create workplaces that are open to neurodiverse individuals, or else they're not going to be there. Or what is actually the more likely scenario is you have neurodiverse individuals who are not able to work to their absolute capacity, are not able to shine because they're not getting the simple accommodations that could make their life a whole lot easier.
So I guess to kind of wrap up this episode, what would be one thing that you could say to a leader or an employer, a boss, manager, someone who's in charge of a team, about fostering a more inclusive workplace or team?
I think my one piece of advice to any manager or any leader is that you need to foster open and honest conversations about your staff and your own strengths and weaknesses. If you can't own your own strengths and weaknesses, your staff aren't going to be able to. So if you want to have those honest conversations so you can tap into your employees' strengths and then support the areas where they may need support, you have to have honest conversations, because most workers are not going to come to the workplace and be like, here are the things I'm great at and here are the things I'm terrible at, manager. Right. Hopefully you can sort through that. That needs to be a conversation. And so if you're not open about your own strengths and weaknesses, how can you expect your employees to be? It has to be an open and honest conversation. And in doing so, you don't lose the respect of your team. I think you gain the respect of your team when you're able to accurately assess your own abilities and aren't walking around being like, I know everything, because nobody does.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to kind of end on. Is there anything that you wanted to plug or mention before we wrap up the episode?
Yeah, if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking as a leader, I get it, I want to do that. Maybe you're neurodiverse yourself, and being a neurodiverse leader is a whole other can of worms, and it's difficult. And you would like myself and my team to come in and do a training that's designed for your organization. That is something that we do, and we do it in a multitude of ways to meet different workplaces' budgets, whether they're small or very large workplaces. Because the truth is that often you need an outsider to help you really create that true process, because often you're not able to see those needs of your own organization.
Yeah, if you are looking for more information about that, you could visit our website, diverselearners.ca/community training. That way you can find out just the different options of training that we're able to do for you in your organization or workplace. Or you can email us, info@diverselearners.ca. Just let us know that you're interested in the community training. But other than that, if you're looking to listen to more episodes of our podcast, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We're all at the Neurodiverse Lens. And you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or watch us on YouTube.
Thank you for listening to the Neurodiverse Lens, a CDL podcast. For more information, visit diverselearners.ca.